Welcome back to Fish on Northwest. I'm Tommy Donlin. We are in the bait lab talking saltwater. Today we are going to cover how to fish for blackmouth or your juvenile Chinook salmon. This is brought to you by Max Lure. Go check them out at maxlure.com. Okay, so on the table, the first thing I want to talk about is downrigger fishing, because if you want to cover water and you're blackmouth fishing, let's face it, these are feeding juvenile Chinook salmon. So they are looking for bait, and that's what you should be looking for too. And once you find that bait, most likely you're going to be able to capitalize on that area, because that's what those fish are feeding on. So the first thing is you got to cover ground. Well, it's hard to do that jigging. Okay. Now, if you've got a well-established area, you have a very specific area where those fish are holding, hey, jigging is a great way to go, or mooching. But the first thing I want to talk about today is trolling. Okay, so if we look at the table, the first thing we're going to look at is the downrigger setup. So I've got a 15-pound downrigger ball here, and we really don't run much less than that unless you're running a third rigger, and then you're going to go to maybe that middle rigger, and that's going to be a 12-pound ball. But this is a 15-pound ball or a 20-pound ball. If you're running the Scotty 2106s, okay, or you're running the Digitrol cannons, you have a lot more capability, and you can run and get away with that 20-pound ball. And I'll tell you what, if you can get away with that heavier ball, you want to do so, because it really keeps your gear organized and separated. Okay, back to the table. So one of the things that you're going to notice right away is I've got the downrigger ball, and then I've got a snubber connection, okay, to a rudder. This is a rudder or a fin, okay. Now I'll tell you what, there's two types of polymer that these snubbers are typically made out of, unless you go with a commercial version that's black. Typically, you're going to find these in blue and green, okay? I'm going to pull one over into camera view here so you can see the green one. So I will tell you right now that the lifetime expectancy of the green one is a lot less than this blue polymer. So what you're going to notice is that I've reinforced this snubber with 300-pound test monofilament crimped. And you can tell that there's a little bit of slack in that monofilament, because this polymer, this green piece, stretches when you apply a downrigger ball to it. Okay, this is a fail-safe. If this green piece fails, I've got 300-pound. The reason I add it is because the 300-pound is not as nice on the hands when you go to grab the downrigger ball by the green snubber. Okay, so that's just a little detail there. Now, with blackmouth, in a lot of cases, you're always running on the bottom. Okay, you're going to be running your gear very close to the bottom, if not banging that downrigger ball against the bottom. And the other thing is, so you're going to be, potentially in that deep water zone, and you want to have a side profile view of something that attracts that fish over to where your gear is, and that's this rudder. Okay. The other thing is you've got your flasher set up, okay? Now, your flasher is an intermittent flash in the water. If you think about a side profile view of the flasher, it's rotating. And so when it gets to the top or the bottom of its rotation, there's no flash. So it's almost like a blink. You see and in this case, and a lot of the flashers that we're using for blackmouth, it's gonna have a glow side. So you look at any one of these flashers, and it doesn't matter what brand of flasher you use, you're gonna have some sort of glow feature on one side, and depending on the flasher, you have a silver mylar, or maybe you have a glow on the other side. But as this thing rotates through the water, you're gonna see the glow side, or the fish will see the glow side, and then it's gonna see the silver side, and it's gonna flash back and forth, okay? You gotta always put your mind in terms of what that fish sees when it reacts and comes into your spread. And it's the same thing if they're below your gear. If you are running your gear off the bottom, they're going to be seeing a flash and then the silver side, but it's only intermittent. The thing that's nice about a rudder is if they look off to one side, they're going to always see this. This thing doesn't rotate at all. It's always a constant profile in the water. And the other thing you're going to notice is this is dimpled. Okay, this rudder's dimpled, so it's got a different noise profile as the water comes across the surface of this rudder. And the other thing is, if you're running like an all chrome rudder, it's definitely a light reflective rudder, okay? So that's number one. I'm pretty much always running a rudder. The other thing is I'm gonna have a release clip. Now I like to run long leashes on my release clips, about 4 to 6 feet, something in that range, and that's gonna go off the end of the rudder. All right, so that is the very bottom end of the equation. From there, let's talk a little bit more about flashers. So you've got your typical 360 flasher. These ones are breakaway, and you know, I was lucky enough to where I stockpiled Q Cove flashers when they were in production. They're not in production anymore, okay? Now, if you go back into the Fish on Northwest archives on YouTube, you're gonna find where Dwayne did a make your own breakaway flasher. You can follow that. We'll put the link in the description. But otherwise, I'm a big fan of breakaway flashers. When I hook a fish, I do not want this flasher coming into the equation. That's number one. Okay, now, if you are running a hoochie or you're running an ace high fly, okay, you have to put action into that bait, into that lure, because it doesn't have its own action. If you're running a spoon or you're running a bait, you can get away with your rotational flasher, okay, your fish flash. And if I'm running, say I am running a 3 downrigger setup, or say I'm stacking gear, you have to think in terms of gear separation. If I'm putting 2 rods on 1 downrigger, if I put 2 big 360-degree flashers, and especially if I'm trolling deep and I've got a lot of blowback, there's a high likelihood that those flashers are gonna tangle when I'm in a turn situation. If you're going straight all day, like you're in the open ocean and you're only gonna go straight, you're gonna set the autopilot and you're gonna go, and you don't have a cross current, hey, knock yourself out. But those times are few and far between, and so we're usually always gonna work one of these flashers, these fish flashes, into the equation. The other thing that I'll tell you is this is going to provide a different light profile, okay? So this thing is going to spin at a higher revolution than your 360-degree flasher. So it's going to give a totally different presentation. And we like to have at least one of these in the spread, because if we're running bait, this creates a totally different flash than your 360-degree flasher. Okay, so that was the flashers. The next thing I want to look at on the table here is you've got a number of offerings. You've got your standard hoochie rig, and I'm just going to point out a couple of things here. We got a lot to cover. I want to keep moving. This is your standard Gold Star hoochie. I've got a couple beads in here. I've got a tinsel skirt that's glow. Again, you're going to see glow as a main theme here. But as I slide this hoochie back and I kind of lay it on the table, you're going to notice pretty much one thing. That bottom hook, that trail hook, is exposed from the skirt. Okay, the point of the hook is right outside of the end of the skirt. The other one is inside of it. The other thing you're going to notice is that I've got them 2 different directions. I've got them basically at about a 90-degree angle. So one is pointed up and one is pointed at the side. And I always run my rigs this way because I figure if, you know, the salmon gets it in its mouth, it's going to have a higher likelihood of getting one of the 2 hooks, instead of if both hooks are in the same plane, they come up and bite, you know, potentially they can slide off. You know, and another thing with hook design is you always want to run a hook that's offset, okay? And I know you can buy barbless hooks right out of the bat, but I'm a big proponent of buying a barbed hook and then crimping the barb. You're gonna be legal, and there's still gonna be a little bit of a bump there. I'm always looking for some sort of advantage in this fishery where we're not allowed to use barbed hooks. Okay, back to the table. The other thing I'm going to talk about here is really the weight of this leader. This is a 40-pound Maxima Ultra Green leader, and this one is running about in that 36 to 40-inch range. And I'll tell you that when I talk 36 to 40 inches, I'm measuring from the back of this hook to the very leading edge of this swivel, just so we're talking the same nomenclature. Now, the other thing is, I'm going to talk about weight, okay? You can't get away with running 30-pound leader on a hoochie and expect it to have the wounded bait action. So with this hoochie, and I've got 4 beads there, I've got a tinsel skirt, there's a little bit of weight to this rig. Now, if you run something like an ace high fly, this is a totally lighter presentation. Okay, and a slightly different profile too. And especially with all the mylar that goes into these ace high flies, they shine like crazy. And you've got a faceted head as well. This thing's a lot lighter. You're gonna get a lot more whip behind the flasher using the same leader length from an ace high fly than you will from a hoochie. It's good to have both. You know, one of the things when we're trolling for blackmouth, right, we're typically trolling slower than we usually would. So we're looking to go just fast enough with the current to get that flasher to flip over, okay? Now, if you're having trouble or you feel like, hey, I'm going way too fast to get my flashers to rotate, I will tell you that with these flashers, you can take a heat gun and you can heat up this radius of the flasher, and you can actually increase the bend at each end, and that's going to allow you to rotate the 360-degree flasher at a lower speed. So that's a little trick there. Back to our offerings at the table. Always love to have glow. Again, kind of mentioned it before, I'm going to continue to mention it. Both of these are glow, both the Ace High Fly and the Hoochie. As we go forward and we look at spoons, I mean, there is just a plethora of offerings, and I usually carry it all. But one of the things that I will say is that when you're going and you're picking, you're picking a spoon, you're picking a Hoochie, you really want to match the hatch, okay? If the bait that you're finding in the area, say you catch that one fish, you want to look at what's in that fish's stomach. If that bait is firecracker herring or really small herring, match the hatch. Now the caveat to that is if you do, say I match the hatch, say we're finding candlefish in the fish's stomach, and I've got something like this Ace High Fly here that's your needlefish. If I do start running that lure, or say I start running, one of these small 2-inch silver horde kingfishers, and I realize that, hey, I'm hooking a lot of sublegal fish, and that seems to be all I'm getting, that's when you would abandon the small gear. Okay, and start upsizing your gear. A lot of times, even this time of year, you're still going to find the herring that are approaching that green label size or still under. So this size of spoon, this 3.5, is perfect for a blackmouth fishery. Now you also have the coho killer. And the coho killer is great as well. Now, one of the things that I will mention is that when they come out of the box, there's really not a lot of bend in that coho killer. So what I do, I'm going to turn this sideways so you can see it on the camera, but I put a pretty mean bend in this coho killer, and I'm bending it this radius and this radius to get this really nice, not quite a full U, but pretty drastic shape, and that's to drive the action in the spoon. Okay, and you're going to see me do the same thing with a your typical kingfisher light. I'm going to take the back end of the spoon, especially when I'm trolling slow. Even if you're trolling slow, you still want a lot of action on that lure. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to bend the back end of that lure just like that. Go back to the table, we look at that bend. It almost matches somewhat the angle that I put the back end of the coho killer in. I will mention that what you don't want to do, especially on the coho killer, is when it comes to this wrist section of the tail, you do not want to bend that area of the tail. Okay, that metal, that's your thinnest cross section of the material, and you will experience failure in that region over time, fish after fish. So do not bend it here if you can avoid it. Keep the bends up here. All right, now one of the things that we'll talk about too is, say you are getting those sublegal fish, and no matter what you troll, you're trolling a 4-inch spoon, maybe even try a 5-inch spoon, and you're still in those small resident Chinook salmon. You can always go to a plug, okay? And these plugs fish well year round. And this one here, this is a silver horde plug. This is herring aid. There's just something about the combination of the blue, the yellow, and the glow that these fish love, both for the winter Chinook fishery and also for the summer king fishery. So this is something that I'm always going to have on the boat, is the herring aid plug. And these things do fish well, and they will get you away. You're not going to have as many bites, okay, typically with plugs, as you will, with some of this other gear, but you're going to find a lot of the more quality fish. Okay, and then one of my favorite offerings, and one that's been doing really well up at CQ this year, is your anchovy rig. Okay, so as we look at the table here and I move some of this other stuff out of the way, you're going to see Rice Davis heads. And depending on what country you're from, or what part of what county you're from, maybe you say Reese, maybe you say Rice. Doesn't really matter, but it's spelled like this and it looks like this. These are the ones that I use, and they work really well. All right, so I got two here just for demonstration purposes. You're going to notice that I use the wires. So you can buy the Rice Davis wires that go in and connect to the head. Okay, now this is like, it's almost like cheating. This is really like cheating, because with that wire, I can now take my anchovy and I can put it at the exact bend that I need to get that anchovy to spin in a garden hose, right? That drill bit presentation that I'm looking for. Basically that's cheating. You're not trying to, like, you know, just perfectly, you know, cure the bait, and then you're playing with toothpicks, and then you're trying to, you know, mess with the hook placement. Nah, once you get this wire in there, it's game over. That's all you have to do. By the way, our presentation bait today, this is brought to you by Banjo Minnow. If you grew up in like the 80s or 90s, you remember the infomercial that was sold to you like, hey, you buy the Banjo Minnow, you can catch anything. Well, as a kid, I bothered my parents over and over again. I need the Banjo Minnow. And guess what I found for this demo? The Banjo Minnow. So I'll just kind of show you how this works. Now with these heads, the nice thing is the wire. And then the other thing is I can put these hooks wherever I want. Once I shove this anchovy up into this head, I can literally put the hooks, you know, one at the dorsal, let the other one dangle. It doesn't matter. And the hook is not gonna change the curvature of the bait. Now here's why. As soon as I get that hook placed, and again, this wire is going to be inside the fish. So as we load this, so this is the process for loading this. You're going to take this wire, and again, you're going to cut this wire to length. You'll figure out the proper length for the fish. If you pull this, put that bait up to the head, you don't want it sticking out, so I'd probably cut this wire right here. By the way, I also run herring in here. That's why the wire is long. But you're going to take this anchovy, and you're going to start this wire, sorry, Banjo Minnow, right into its gills, and you're gonna run it all the way down the length of the anchovy, okay? And this one needs to be cut, so it's gonna stick out the end, but you'll get the idea. Then once you have this wire down here, you're gonna put a bend in that anchovy, okay? You're gonna bend the head a little bit, you're gonna bend the tail a little bit, and you're gonna get that nice curve that you're looking for, again, to provide that drill bit presentation, okay? And then once you have that drill bit presentation you like, just remember that position of the wire, okay? And then as soon as you get it in there, you're gonna take the lead hook, and you're gonna put that right along the dorsal fin through here. And, you know, and sometimes I run it all the way through if it's skinny, and oops, right here, I'll run it straight through. If it's skinny, if it's a little bit thicker, you can run it along the side either way, depending on the bait. And then you can cinch this up to where you want it. You can put the toothpick in it, and that's gonna hold your leader just like that. It's not gonna, because you put a toothpick in it, it is not gonna pull on this leader and change the curvature of that anchovy, okay? And then, you know, the other thing is, the reason we use these is it's just a great way to make a hardy bait. If you do brine your bait, you can run that bait for an hour and a half, and it'll be just fine in that anchovy head. As long as you can preserve the head of the bait into that helmet, it's gonna run for a while. Now, I mean, hopefully it only lasts 15 minutes and you get bit, but that's why we brine the bait, and that's why we use the heads. And especially, you know, I grew up trolling the ocean on sport fishers without trolling valves, and with one engine and gear, the slowest we could go was like 2.5 to 2.7 knots. And we had to use heads, right? And so just grew up using heads. Great way to preserve your bait. And, you know, I tell you what, this year at CQ, they just been knocking them dead with the anchovies, and they've been running them right on the bottom, in the dirt, in the mud, and getting bit over and over again. So that is the anchovy rig. Now, the other thing I'm gonna mention here, you're gonna notice two different downrigger releases here on the table. You're gonna notice the Pro release, and you're gonna notice your typical Scotty release. When I am running bait, I like to use the Scotty release because it gives a little less tension on the bait than the Pro release. The Pro release I use a lot for gear. When I know that I want a deep hook set on that fish, or a good hook set before it releases off of this release, I'll use this Pro release. Now I will tell you that when you run this, there's a little bit of a learning curve on it, and if you wrap the line the wrong way around the bobbin, you are gonna break your main line. So be careful, read the directions, make sure you know how to use it. But I use this one for gear, and I use the Scotty release for bait, okay? Because I feel that the fish can take the bait easier, it can turn with the bait in its mouth, not feel as much tension, feels natural, and they can turn and make sure that they get the hook seated in the corner of their mouth. So that's the reason for this release here. Okay, All right, and those are the tips and tricks for fishing blackmouth, and really anywhere blackmouth. It doesn't matter if you're fishing CQ, Puget Sound, San Juan Islands, really applies anywhere where you're fishing for those resident Chinook juvenile salmon. Works really well, cover the gamut. All right, don't go anywhere. We're gonna be right back with Matt Messing. We're gonna see how he's been doing up in CQ. Stay tuned.